I hope you are enjoying the conference. We've had quite a range of different speakers, so I've learned a lot myself from sharing and stuff like that as well. So absolutely fantastic. So I just want to see now, do I have my colleague Dasha, who is going to introduce the Cibyl student survey. Here we go. Here's Dasha. Okay. So Dasha, thank you very much for joining us today. I know you're quite busy in preparing both the UK and the Irish Cibyl. I'll never get rid of Trendons. I do apologise. So the Cibyl student survey. So thank you for taking the time to deliver the national picture to us. If anybody has any questions for Dasha, right, you might just drop them into the Q&A section, and there's an upvoting opportunity there as well, and we'll come around to them at the end of the session. Okay, thanks, Dasha.
Brilliant, thanks so much, Gavin. I'm just going to share my screen so you can all see the slides. Okay, cool. Brilliant, hopefully you can all see that. So the first thing to say is that we used to be called Trendons, and we're now called Cibyl. So some of you, because we partner with a number of institutions in Ireland, will have heard of us before and are already working with us, which we're really, really grateful for. So you would have known us as Trendons, and we rebranded to Cibyl just in February this year. So it's relatively new, I suppose, as a brand. We're still very much the same team, doing the same work, but just new brand, new look and feel. So I hope you like it, and yeah, that's why you'll see Cibyl everywhere today. So the idea for today is to share our latest graduate research for Ireland, so the 2021 data set, and this is the first time we're sharing this data with institutions in Ireland, so you'll be the first to see it. This means we haven't delivered any of our partner reports, and we haven't spoken to any institutions directly about their data sets. Cool, so just a little bit of context on Cibyl. So Cibyl is actually part of a bigger group called Group GTI. Group GTI have been in graduate recruitment for over 30 years now, both in UK and Ireland. And we've got a series of sub-brands as part of GTI. So Target Connect is our UK and Ireland actually careers platform. Some of you may be using. Cibyl is a market research consultancy, part of GTI. Obviously, the Irish version of GTI is Grad Ireland, and then we've also got our student platform, so Grad Ireland and Target Jobs in the UK. So all of these sub-brands belong to the same company, including Cibyl. Now, a little bit on Cibyl itself. So in our data set, we've got large numbers of students, the largest in both UK and Ireland, and we manage to survey over 100,000 students annually. This is across schools in the UK, so students aged 12 to 18, undergraduates across both UK and Ireland, postgraduates and recent graduates as well. So we can really look at the entire student journey when it comes to their career aspirations. So as a result, we have our three main flagship projects that we run on an annual basis, and that's the Cibyl Graduate Research Ireland, which is what we'll be looking at today. We've then got the Cibyl School Leaver Research in the UK, Cibyl Graduate Research in the UK, and then we also do bespoke research for both employers and universities on specific topics of interest. It could be mental health, for example, of students, or it could be specific inclusion topics like LGBT inclusion. In terms of our methods, we primarily work with large quantitative data sets that we gather through online surveys, and we've got our internal survey and research platform. So we kind of do the entire end-to-end project around collecting the data, analysing that, and then presenting it back to our clients and partners. So without further ado, today is all about the Irish graduate research, and in 2021 we had our record sample of almost 21,000 responses. So last year, just for comparison, we had 15,000 responses. So I've actually gone up by almost 6,000. And especially for those of you that have worked with us in the past, you'll know that this is a huge achievement. And every year since we've been running the survey in Ireland, we've been increasing student engagement. So it's clear that, you know, many more institutions are supporting us. So thank you very much for engaging with our research and our survey. It does mean that we can give you a much richer data set in return, and dig into some of the kind of student groups of interest, minority groups, and obviously look at your specific institution as well. So thank you for that. 28 institutions have taken part this year, and we absolutely welcome all of you to take part and to kind of get involved in the research if you aren't already, because the idea for us is to be as nationally representative in Ireland as we can be. So in the survey, we include all year groups. So first years all the way through to recent graduates, as I mentioned, we are very focused on diversity. So we capture gender, ethnicity, sexuality, socioeconomic status, and disability. So any diversity questions or priorities that you've got, we'll be able to address. And the data is also weighted by university and gender. So we apply weightings, again, to ensure that the data is truly representative of the student body in Ireland. Perhaps final thing to mention is that the survey was in field between October 2020 and January 2021. So it's looking at the first semester of the current academic year. Okay, so a little bit on how we collect the sample. So 19 institutions currently partner with us. So although we've had responses from 28 institutions in Ireland, as you saw, that's because we were using our database, so Grad Ireland student database. But in terms of active partnership, that's currently 19 institutions. So clearly we're looking to grow our partnership group. And again, we'd be very, very keen to partner with you if you aren't already. And I'll be very, very happy to have that conversation with you following this webinar. Over 50% of our sample comes from our partners, so obviously our partnerships are incredibly important to us. And of course, we then use internal databases and our website to promote the survey to students as well. So here's a list of our partners at the moment. So you may, it may be a surprise, you may not know that your institution is partnering with us because it might just be the careers team that's engaging with us or someone specific, but that's the overview at the moment. And as I said, we are looking to grow that. Cool. So let's get into the results. First of all, what are the impacts of COVID on Generation Z? So the generation of university students in question. When we look at sort of secondary research available in the market, we know that the 18 to 25-year-olds feel the most impacted by COVID in terms of their mental health, but also in terms of their, their options and their future. Unsurprisingly, so their lifestyle has changed dramatically, kind of pre-COVID and post-COVID. These students were already known as a practical and frugal generation. So even before COVID, these students were thinking about the long term and they were concerned with the earning potential of the role and things like that. But that's been even more emphasized by the pandemic. And finally, as a result of COVID, we've seen the students be incredibly open-minded about careers and transferable skills. So we know that students have been applying to more jobs, considering sectors and roles that they wouldn't consider otherwise. And as a result, they have become more open-minded about what the future of work might look like for them, which is great. So in terms of the agenda, we'll first have a look at our results in terms of the impact of COVID. We will then talk about engaging students in the digital era. What does that look like for career services? We'll have a look at career service usage. So how much have they used their career services in Ireland? What have they most valued? And what do we do going forward? We'll have a look at the work experience that they gained, as well as what they expect from employers, and again, how you can support them, as a result. We'll look at confidence and skills, as well as different ways that students prefer to be assessed, with all the different virtual assessments coming in, and again, how you can support. And finally, we'll talk about the Cibyl data and how we can help on the journey as well from our perspective. Brilliant. So impact of COVID on career thinking. So first question we ask students is, what are they more likely to do after university as a result of COVID? So you can see from this chart that the first two things they're more likely to do are look for a job that allows flexible working and the job that allows to work from home specifically. So flexible working and working from home are not necessarily the same thing, but obviously, they are linked, right? So students definitely have an expectation they'll be able to work from home in their first graduate role, but also they really expect flexibility from employers, and that's become increasingly important to them when selecting an employer. 15% of all students said that they're looking to do a postgraduate degree as a direct result of COVID. So they're sort of waiting out entering the labour market, holding out and seeing what happens while they complete their masters for a year or two. They're more likely to live near their family, obviously for the kind of financial constraints and concerns, and the appetite for risk is much reduced. So things like being entrepreneurial, starting their own business, the desire to do that has unfortunately gone down, and instead students are focusing on just getting a graduate job and just applying. Okay, so what are the top sectors for students in 2021? What you're seeing from this chart is that actually a number of sectors have gone up in popularity, and that's because students are diversifying their applications. So where before they might have been focused on one sector, say they decided to go into the public service, or they might want to work in IT, This year, they've kind of been applying cross-sector. So they'll apply to some employers in IT, other employers in the public sector, etc. So as a result, a few sectors have benefited from that and have certainly seen an increase in applications. So in Ireland, the public sector is the most popular this year, interestingly, ahead of IT and ahead of science. So that's kind of a direct impact of the pandemic. Obviously, the public service is seen to be a secure kind of sector to work in, and the job security element is increasingly important to students this year. We also see that the banking as a sector, so banking, insurance and financial services, accounting and professional services, and kind of the financial institutions have really benefited from the pandemic. And again, students are seeing those sectors as more desirable as a direct result of COVID. Yeah, the only sectors, interestingly, that have gone down in popularity very slightly are IT and science, you know, who were leading sectors beforehand. So there have definitely been sector impacts on students. So how do we engage with students in the digital era? So all of these different ways of engaging used to be on campus, right? So employers used to go on campus and run all of these events, or in conjunction with the career service. However, they have been virtual in 2020. And what we're looking to understand here is, how do we move forward? What's quite clear from students is that overall, they are keen to go back to the face-to-face ways of engaging with employers. This is particularly the case for things like Insight Open Days, so where they get to actually go into the office, meet an employer, get a feel for what it's like to work there. Career fairs, you know, virtual career fairs have been a little bit hit and miss, both for students and for employers. And I think that students are quite keen for that kind of event to take place face-to-face when possible. But then on the other side of the scale, if you look to the right, things like employer presentations or different types of competitions and prize draws that employers may run generally are seen to be better virtual, or indeed there isn't a huge amount of preference for whether that's face-to-face or virtual. So certainly from an employer presentation point of view, we know that those have been a lot more accessible to students across the country, you know, if they're sort of open nationally as opposed to happening at a particular university and where students are having to travel, for example. With things like guest lectures and brand ambassadors as well, yes, there's some preference for that to be face-to-face, but not a huge amount of preference. So perhaps these types of engagements can also stay virtual going forward. But it's quite clear that there's a message from students that they do want to start meeting employers again as soon as they can, unfortunately. Okay, so what about digital ways of engaging? So here you've got a list of digital methods which have always been digital, and what we want to understand this year is what students have used and found effective versus what they've used and did not find effective. And we can see here that the most popular methods of engaging with employers in Ireland are to look at directly on employer websites, which is very Gen Z because they are independent in how they do the research. So they go out of their way to you know, to research employers, and they're quite happy to do that. And then career-related websites will be third-party platforms like Grand Island, you know, where students can go and look at opportunities and directly engage with employers on that. So that's obviously been a very popular method. We've then got social media, and following that, you've got career service websites and emails from career services. So students are definitely using their career service, not as much as they are career-related websites, job sites, and employer sites directly. And you can see again that that's been a little bit more hit and miss for students, where, you know, it's slightly less likely to be effective. And that will, of course, depend on the type of engagement, the type of institution that you're in. And again, we can give you those results for your specific institution so you can see how you compare nationally, for example. I think one thing to mention here as well is students' perceptions of how relevant their career service is to them personally, depending on their chosen career path and their subject background as well. And now on the very end of the scale to the right, we've got more innovative things like webinars and podcasts. And with webinars, you know, less than 50% of students have been attending a webinar, a virtual webinar, which you may think is quite low, but actually compared to previous years, it's obviously an increase. But again, not many employers are necessarily running webinars just yet. So there's been a period of adjustment for employers as well. Okay. So we've got some student quotes for you on, you know, employee engagement overall and career services, which I'll let you read. So I think, clearly students are very grateful about all the effort that's gone into career support they receive from their career services, and they're absolutely recognising what you have been doing for them. However, there is also a clear preference for some of these events to be face-to-face. They don't feel they can necessarily always express themselves in the best way virtually, and they're keen to make an impact on employers, of course, and they prefer to do that face-to-face if they can. Okay, so how effective have they found those digital methods of engaging based on institutions? So I mentioned that there's quite a bit of difference depending on which institution we look at. And here I've just broken down institutes of technology versus kind of more traditional universities in Ireland. And you can see that when it comes to effectiveness, university students are actually more likely to use their career services, whether that's career service websites or emails from career services, than students at the institutes of technology. Yeah, so there's a little bit more engagement across the board from students at universities, whether that's webinars, career-related platforms, or indeed employer websites. They would appear to be a little bit more proactive. So again, given your specific challenges as an institution, we can sort of use the data to help you answer some of those questions around how to engage with students better. So on the topic of engagement, let's have a look at career services usage. So a question here is, what have they used their career services for? So nationally, what are the key things that they come to you for? And we've split this data up by first year versus returning students, so second and final year students. And you can see that number one thing they come to you for is to look at opportunities. So it's to very directly look at opportunities they can apply to. Second to that is social media, so to follow you on social media. And thirdly is to access careers information. And if we break this data down by different types of students, we can see that returning students are definitely more proactive when looking at opportunities, and across the board, where first year students use the career services less. However, they are more likely than returning students to follow you on social media. So when it comes to social media engagement, that's really, really great for young students that have just come into university and are just starting to think about their careers. Well, certainly for the older students, it's the events and the kind of more action-oriented activities that they are looking for from their career services. Okay, so for the students that said they haven't used their career services, there's a follow-up question on why haven't you used that? And here we're again just showing you that depending on the student group in question, the response can be very, very different. So for the total sample, generally students say they're too busy, which is obviously a very common, I suppose, excuse or reason not to use the career service. Secondly, they say they're not aware of the services or they don't quite know what's available to them. And thirdly, they're unsure about their career prospects, so they don't yet know what questions they want to ask you. And when we look at Black students, just for comparison, we can see that Black students are much more likely to not use their career services because they're not aware. So there's even less awareness of the career services among the Black population, or indeed that they are unsure about their career prospects. So they're significantly more likely to be unsure about what it is they want to do next, or indeed to feel anxious. So thinking about my career prospects makes me anxious is another big reason why Black students are not engaging. So when you're thinking about your ethnic minorities that you're trying to support, it's likely that they're facing different challenges when using your career service. Okay, so what about satisfaction? Just broadly speaking, how satisfied are students this year compared to last year? If you have a look, students are, as expected, a little bit less likely to be satisfied with the service, and are a lot more likely to feel neutral about it. So it's not that they're not satisfied or dissatisfied, it's actually that they just haven't been able to form an opinion, and it's probably because a lot of these services were run virtually, and as much as students have absolutely appreciated that, they perhaps didn't feel that the interaction was as valuable as when it was face-to-face with some of the employers. And if you break this data down again by first years versus returning students, you can see that it's first years that are least likely to have a strong opinion on the career service, also because they simply don't use it as much, or perhaps don't see so much reason to engage at the very start of their university journey, rightly or wrongly. Okay, so then we're looking at specific areas of the career service. How satisfied are students overall? Here we're looking at it by different types of disabilities. Just to give you again some context, and you can see that students that have a mental or a physical impairment are generally less likely to be satisfied with their career service. So for all students, email communication is the #1 area where they are satisfied, followed by careers workshops and the range of opportunities available to them. So those are the 3 areas that students are most happy with. And then at the very bottom, we've got things like availability of appointments and usefulness of appointments. So either they can't get one, or if they've had one, they've not necessarily found it useful. So those are the areas of least satisfaction overall. And you can see that students without a disability are more likely to be satisfied. So it might be the case that students, particularly with a mental impairment, so it could be a mental health difficulty, it could be a learning difficulty or a social communication impairment, they are struggling to access the service or are finding it less useful overall. So how much are we catering to those students that might need extra support, I suppose, is the question. Okay, so a little bit more feedback on career service for you. So again, despite these slightly more lukewarm results on satisfaction, again, it's very, very clear that first years and final years across the board are very, very grateful for what they've seen from you. And students understand that COVID has caused a lot of disruption, which is why we're not seeing dissatisfaction. We're just seeing a more neutral perspective on careers overall this year. Brilliant. So let's talk about some of the practicalities around the experience that students have been able to get and what they expect from employers. So first of all, we just ask a general question of how many students have had any type of work experience. And about 60% of students say they've had a part-time job, which is brilliant. Second most common experience is to do voluntary or charity work. Thirdly, it's a placement year, and then about 25% of all students have done an internship with an employer directly. But what's particularly interesting again is how accessible these experiences are to different types of students. So if we have a look at lower socioeconomic versus higher socioeconomic students, we can see that those from a higher socioeconomic background are significantly more likely to have a leadership role at university and a student society. They are significantly more likely to have done an internship or to indeed have had a part-time job or voluntary work. But interestingly, not necessarily more likely to do courses that involve a placement year. So just thinking again about how we might support students from a lower socioeconomic background when it comes to employers and their CVs, it's likely that they'll be a little bit less attractive because of the lack of experience compared to some of the other groups. So some targeted initiatives might be helpful in this area as well. Okay, so what about virtual internships? We know that students have taken that up when that's been available, and out of everyone that has done an internship, 18% have done so virtually. So 18% have done it in 2020, essentially. And you can see here that that's brilliant, but actually when we start to break it down by different groups, those from a lower socioeconomic background are more likely to have access to virtual internship than those from a higher socioeconomic background. So actually doing things virtually from employers has opened doors for students and has made those opportunities more inclusive, which is a real benefit of kind of some of the virtual activities that are going on, and perhaps something that should continue going forward. When we look at their perception of usefulness of such activities, we can see that those from a lower socioeconomic background are more likely to find it more valuable than the total sample, and certainly than the higher socioeconomic backgrounds. So again, there's a question there of what happens in the office when students actually do those internships face-to-face. How well do they fit in? How much are they supported? And perhaps again, virtually, actually they're not seeing, they feel more included, or they're not seeing those differences between different student groups as much, which is interesting. We then also ask questions, ask students what's more important to them in the virtual internship. So if they're doing things virtually, what do they pay more attention to? And you can see on the right that training and development becomes more important, knowing that they can secure a graduate opportunity following that internship, and thirdly, getting regular feedback from employers. So in supporting students, in securing those opportunities, those are the elements that you should be focusing on. And again, slightly different priorities for lower to higher socioeconomic groups, where the lower socioeconomic group place more emphasis on having the right technical equipment. So again, if they are going to pursue a virtual opportunity, which clearly they're very keen to do, have they got the right equipment to be able to do that, and the right environment to be able to do that in if they're working from home? It's a big question. Okay, so what about employer expectations? What is it that Gen Z fundamentally expect from employers this year? So some aspects have been consistent and have not changed from the previous year, such as interesting work, good career prospects, and training and development are the three areas where the students place the most expectation. So they're very focused on personal development and growth, and they are thinking about the long term when they're selecting their employers, not just short-term gain, like a starting salary, right? It has to be in combination with other factors. What has increased in importance for students this year, however, are things like job security. We can see that's in the top 6 areas that students prioritize. And then certainly culture is another area that's really important to these students. So diversity and inclusion, excellent role models, chance to make a difference, friendly colleagues, etc. Those are all areas that students really, really value when researching employers and selecting them. What's actually the least important to students in the context of everything else are things like status and prestige of the employer, starting salary, or indeed international opportunities, which at the moment will be even less relevant going into the next few years. Okay, so what about work and environment? This was a new question for us this year. And irrespective of the sector or the role that students choose, we know that they have a preference for the type of environment they want to be in. So the number one priority for all graduates is to be intellectually challenged. And secondly, is to serve a greater good. So they really want to be doing work that they're connected to and that they think is meaningful and is sort of helping make the world a better place. As cheesy as that is a very Gen Z focus on careers. But again, priorities are different depending on student groups. So you can see here that for Asian and Black students, they are more focused on being in a creative, innovative environment and are less focused on serving a greater good, are again more focused on being in a big company, in a structured role, having an international career, and becoming a technical expert. That's particularly prominent for Asian students who are really, really focused on that when selecting their career. Again, if we look to the right and have a look at students with disabilities, which environments they want to be in, they are very, very concerned with giving back, so serving the greater good. They want to be in a creative and innovative environment and are less concerned with being in a big, large kind of corporate company, becoming a technical expert, etc. So you can break this data down for any group of interest. For example, male to female may be interesting as well, because we know that they've got different priorities as well. So how do you support students kind of using this insight? And then finally, what about working from home? So traditionally, graduates would not get to work from home very much when they start their careers, but certainly now, following the pandemic, 69% of graduates expect to work from home at least 1 day a week in their first graduate role. So that's the kind of expectation that they've got from employers, and it'd be interesting to see if employers will be able to fulfill that kind of flexibility and working from home ability as well. Okay, and now we're going to have a look at confidence at students and the different ways that they like to be assessed for their future careers. So first of all, what are the skills they're most confident in entering the employment market from university? We can see that creativity is the number one skill that students overall feel confident about. This is followed by problem solving, communication, leadership, and organization in equal measure. So those are the types of transferable skills that students feel they can talk about in interviews and kind of bring to the table. Now, the skills that they're less confident in are towards the bottom. So that would be things like adaptability, resilience. And actually, that's interesting because we know that so many employers are focused on, employing resilient students, understanding if you are resilient. So perhaps helping students have that dialogue and explain, why they feel they are resilient or how they can demonstrate that would be helpful. They don't feel very confident around innovation or indeed commercial awareness. Technical and data skills, interestingly, are around the middle, but certainly not an area where most students feel confident in. And again, that's another area that we know is increasingly important to employers. If we break this down by gender, on the right, we can see some interesting differences. Again, so as you start to look at different student groups, different support is needed. So, for example, we can see that males are more confident across the board. And that's particularly true in areas of problem solving, leadership, technical and data skills. So technical roles continue to overly attract male candidates, and entrepreneurship towards the bottom, whereas females feel more confident in their organization and communication skills. So there are some clear gender, stereotypes and differences still at play even in this day and age. And finally, what about assessments? So what we've done here is we've combined virtual and face-to-face assessments, and we're looking at the net preference of those overall, right? So what is it that students would really like to do? Face-to-face interviews are the most preferred way of being assessed, the most natural way of doing that. Online application forms students are happy with, and face-to-face assessment centres, interestingly, are the third preferred way of being assessed. What students feel a lot less confident about are things like numerical verbal reasoning tests, which actually a lot of employers do use, game-based assessment, virtual assessment centres, and certainly recorded video interviews are the least preferred way for being assessed for students. And even following the pandemic, where you might think their confidence has increased for those types of things, they still really, really hate recorded video interviews. However, if we look at live video interviews, that's actually preferred ahead of phone interviews, for example. So there's certainly been progress around interviewing on video and doing things live virtually, where some confidence has been developed for students. Again, if we look at Black females, for example, just as a comparison to the total, they tend to be less confident in numerical and verbal reasoning tests, as well as strength-based aptitude tests, but are more confident in live video interviews and phone interviews. So again, understanding how to support females, and particularly females from ethnic minorities, the data is needed to kind of back that up, and how to train them. Okay, and then what about assessment that leads to dropout? So here we're looking specifically at disliked and most likely to lead to dropout assessment methods. And again, breaking this down for students with different types of disabilities. So it could be a learning difficulty or a social communication impairment, so things like autism, which again, employers are becoming really, really present to and are supporting students quite a lot in the assessment process. But still, we can see that students with a learning difficulty are more likely to drop out of a assessment process if it's a numerical verbal reasoning test they need to complete. And also they feel relatively anxious about phone interviews, but not as anxious as students with a social and communication impairment. So perhaps they need a lot more training and support around how to respond to phone interviews and how to perform well compared to your average student. Okay, and a little bit of feedback from students around assessment methods. So clearly students are feeling a little bit anxious about some of the skills for working life, and they're picking out some really, really good skills actually. So data analysis, we mentioned, was almost a universal expectation from employers now. Presentation skills, public speaking, how can you make your students more confident in that? And then, of course, promoting the opportunities, from the career service around helping students to train for numerical assessment, situational judgment tests, and some of the more traditional assessment methods that we know employers are going to use, and particularly a virtual assessment centre as well, if those will continue going forward. Okay, so that's all the insights and data I had for you today, and now just a little bit on how Cibyl can help on this journey. So all of this data that I've shown you was for the national sort of averages and some specific student groups that we felt was interesting to share, but obviously we can do that for you and for your student groups of interest. So the way that we currently partner with institutions is that you promote the survey to your student body in the way that works best for you. So you agree to essentially endorse the survey and send it out to your students in a way that you're most comfortable with, and at a time that works for you. If you then collect at least 100 responses, ideally over 100, you access the national insights for free. So you get your own institutional insights compared to the national benchmark and any other institutions that you're interested in, completely free of charge. So it's not a paid for partnership, it's a free partnership. In addition to the insights, we'll provide recommendations for your specific service, and we'll build a partnership that involves year-round support and optional benchmarking to, as I mentioned, the national averages or other universities in question. So it's not just a case of sending you a report, it's actually a year-round relationship around research and support for your work. So I hope that was interesting. Just to summarise on the key takeaways, we've seen that students are more open-minded about careers as a result of COVID anxiety and the sectors that they are considering, particularly focused on the public sector in Ireland. Students are keen to start meeting employers again, but some interactions can stay virtual. So it's not the case that we can't do things virtually. It's the case that students want a blended approach, but certainly, things like careers fairs and inside days are really valuable when they are face-to-face. Social media is popular for careers engagement for all students, especially first years, but we can see that primarily they come to you for viewing opportunities and accessing careers information. We've seen that running internships virtually and running work experience virtually has opened it up to different types of students. So it's been more accessible for students from a lower socioeconomic background, which is fantastic, who otherwise don't always get to do an internship in the same way that those from a higher socioeconomic background do. And finally, there's been increased emphasis on job security and culture from students as a result of COVID. So that's what they really want to understand and learn about the employers. Hope that was useful. Here are my contact details. And I'll now pass over to Gavin for any questions that we can take.
Yeah, thank you, Dasha. Thank you for the key takeaways, because it makes it much easier for me than to have to sum it up at the end. So thank you for that. I think some of the questions probably allude to some of the key takeaways, but I'll just run through them with you. Probably the top one that has been voted in, is the picture similar across Ireland and the UK, or are there any key differences in the results?
So it is similar, but I would say there are some differences. So I think in terms of how students' satisfaction of career service similarly has dipped in the UK and Ireland. This is not an Ireland-specific phenomenon. It's very much just what's happening. Much like in Ireland, students in the UK are definitely keen to start meeting employers again and go back to face-to-face events. I think in terms of sectors, the picture is quite different. So when we're looking at specific sectors, specific employers, obviously we'll see quite a lot of difference. So there's a real focus on the public sector in Ireland in the way that there isn't in the UK. And IT and tech employers seem to be more popular in the UK than they are in Ireland this year, for example. So there'll be sort of marginal differences across. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Tash. Next one here is the employer presentation. So while students are saying they don't want, they're happier to do more virtual employer presentations versus the ask for more employer campus presence. So that's probably more the activities that they're doing, as opposed to here's a corporate cultural deck that we're going to run through for 40 minutes, I assume.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think. So I think if it's more of an engagement advice session for students around careers, they want that kind of engagement face-to-face. But if it's more of an information session and you can just dial in at your own convenience, in the comfort of your own home, then that's obviously easier if that's done virtually and more students can access that. Yeah,
perfect. Thanks, Tasha. Does the international career reflect international students returning home, or is that Irish students expanding their ambitions and travel?
Yeah, good question. So we need to dissect the data to obviously answer that honestly. But it will be both. So certainly it's the case that international students are more keen on international careers, and sometimes that will be returning to their, home country. But certainly there are also, a number of Irish students who are focused on international careers or want to work for global employers or have those opportunities. Although having said that, that's been less of a priority this year than it has been in the past.
Okay. That's just kind of public sector seems to be more secure job. That refers to your takeaway from that as well.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That was my comment. I wonder in relation to the confidence male versus female, I think that might be overconfidence sometimes. And I'm okay to say that, right? Okay, so that's fine. Paula, can you explain again why the data is weighted by university and gender?
Sure. Yeah. So weighted by university because some universities are obviously bigger than others, and we want to make sure that the samples that we're getting, that we can control to an extent, but not entirely, are representative of the size of that institution. So if it's a smaller institution, then we will make sure that it's weighted so it's still contributing fairly to the results. And the gender point is there because females are more likely to answer surveys than males. That always happens in any context. So we're just weighting that down so that when we look at the results, it's representing both genders equally.
Okay, thank you. And final one, is there any data on the international students, i.e. from outside the EU?
Yes, absolutely there is, yeah. Okay. So we've got data on EU and the non-EU students as well.
Okay, great. Okay, Dasha, final thing is just say thank you very much for taking the time. It was very insightful, very informative. I look forward to the institutional report as well. Did you say what date or timelines?
I didn't actually. So I mentioned this was the first time we'd shared this data with the Irish higher education market, and the plan for individual reports is in the summer. It'll be towards the end of the summer, so around August. Expect to hear from us, and then we'll be delivering that data.
That's great. Okay, thank you, Dasha. I appreciate that.